Sister that really stands out in a crowd. This sister has been doing this for a long time. She made some real smart decisions. I tell you, it really makes you admire black women. She made some smart decisions. First thing, if you're a woman, first smart decision you got to make is, if you're gonna take your partner in life, you got to pick right. I mean, you don't want to be with some loser. You don't want to pick the wrong brother to be walking with. You got to do all the work yourself. You got to pick a good brother. And she picked the best brother. We got this brother, master teacher, brother kwesi right here. A beautiful brother. We like to give him a round of applause as well. He's a soldier. He's been doing this work for a very long time. He's dedicated his life to the liberation of African people.
Point.
We really want to celebrate you today, black women. I know you don't hear this very often. I know it's very difficult out there, but we really, truly do love you. And not only do we love you, but we need you. As black men, we really do need you. That's right. And we recognize that we're not going to make any progress unless we do it together. There's no progress for black women that doesn't include black men, and there's no progress for black men that doesn't include black women. And so we think it's only fitting that today on Mother's Day, we bring you a sister who brings a fabulous presentation. She has a group of different presentations she's done here, but this particular time, she's coming directly to you. She said she was sleeping one time. I know she told me one story. I got a lot of stories. I'm gonna pull this one out. She said she was sleeping and one of the sisters in here talked to her in her sleep and said, "You got to get my story right."
That's right.
You know what I'm talking about. Somebody got your story wrong too. Somebody out there done told your story wrong. You doing whatever you're doing and somebody got your story wrong. It happens all the time. You know, we hear a lot of discouraging and disparaging things about our women now, and they just got the story wrong. Well, this sister went out. She went all the way back, thousands and thousands of years, looking up to see the contributions that black women have made to the race. She didn't stop there. She went back thousands of years. Then she went back hundreds of years. And she went back and said, I'm going to take sisters all the way back from antiquity, and I'm comparing to the sisters of today, and I'm going to see, you know what? The black woman is still strong. She's still that mother of civilization, that queen of the planet Earth, that goddess of the universe that Brother Kwesi shows us in the pyramids of Kemet. And this sister's going to come up here and do a debut presentation. So I don't want you to sit there and be, you know, I want you to be stiff. I want you to get into this thing because this is going to go around the country. So your spirit, they're going to feel the spirit on this tape. So I want you to really enjoy this black woman. And she's going to get deep down and show you that every time the black man and the black family has ever taken a step, the black woman was right there pushing that step. She was making it happen. Never have we taken a step and been successful with anything without the contribution of our women. And the thing that we really appreciate about this sisters, brothers, is, you know, it's kind of hard out here, brothers. A lot of times, black men get talked about pretty bad. Y'all don't know nothing about that, huh? Y'all never heard of a black man being called a dog, huh? You never heard that? You never heard him say, I don't need no man, I'm going to do this myself, blah, blah, blah. You've heard those things? Well, thank you, sister. Well, this sister here doesn't do it like that. It's all about what we can do to move the black family forward. No talk of this, that, and that. It's all about what can we do to contribute to take the black family forward and get some progress. She's going to come up here with a presentation. She's going to knock your socks off. So I want you to get ready. I want you to get relaxed. And most importantly, I want you to get ready to learn. Because these are not opinions that you're going to see on the screen. Everything you're going to see here is facts. She didn't make up anything to come tell you something good about yourself. She's looked at what you've done and what you've contributed, and she put it in a format that's indisputable. So without any further ado, I want to introduce a sister that we love very much. She's going to come up here. She's going to rock your socks off for Mother's Day. She's going to make you go back and tell people about an organization called Positive Comedic Vision. You're going to really enjoy it. I want you to stand up on your feet and give a large round of applause to Sister Merira Kwesi.
All right.
Thank you very much, brothers and sisters. We really appreciate your coming out today, and I want to wish the sisters a happy Mother's Day. And we also want to thank the brothers at PKV, at Positive Comedic Visions, for taking the time out to decide to have a program for the sisters, specifically for Mother's Day. Give them a big round of applause. These are brothers that are coming to you in the spirit of Ursa Ma'at Rasep Tepin Rara Mesu Muriaman. They're brothers that are coming to you in the spirit of Min Kepara Tahuti Mays. These are brothers that are coming to you in the spirit of Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, Gabriel Prosser. These are some serious brothers. They're coming to you in the spirit of Marcus Garvey. That's right. These are the brothers of PKV who decided to have this program for you and decided to provide a platform for us to hear the side of the story about the sisters. So we want to thank them for that. And before I go any further, I must ask the elders in the audience if I may continue to speak. Thank you very much. I have the permission of the elders, and so we'll continue the program. I also want to thank my husband, my Netter Hetch, my divine husband, Ashra Kwesi, because he was the one who encouraged me to do this presentation. It actually started out as part of our lecture series that we do on our Egypt tours. And at that time, it dealt strictly on the ancient queens. But I began to realize that the characteristics, the traits, and the life experiences of many of our ancient queens were very similar to sisters of later years. So I decided to link the past with the present in order to bring our story to life. So we call this presentation Sisters in the Struggle, a tribute to black women liberators. But it's actually the story of black men and black women, because ours has been a history of resistance on the part of both. We have brothers and sisters who have risked and given their lives in a quest for our liberation. Ours is the study of mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers in our quest for freedom. But his story has managed to filter out the accomplishments of black women. Yet when we look at it from an African perspective, our story tells us that the African man looked at the African woman from a whole different perspective. She was a very prominent figure on the African continent. In fact, to the African man, where there was a god, there was a goddess. And where there was a goddess, there was a god. The man was the personification of God on earth, and the woman was the personification of goddess on earth.
That's right. That's right.
And all throughout the African continent, the African woman created royal dynasties. She administered nations, and she led the armies. And so this evening, brothers and sisters, we're going to take a look at those sisters who fought against white supremacy, racism, and aggression. We're going to look at those who used the 3 R's: resistance, rebellion, and radical actions. And many of the sisters that we're going to view are now ancestors. That means they've gone on to the spiritual realm. But we have a full story of their life's actions. And so what we want to do is speak their names to make them live again. And then we're going to look at other sisters who are now elders. But we have a full chronology of their life events. Now, some were those who worked behind the scenes, and others were those who were out in the spotlight. But these are the sisters that we're going to view. Some who were born leaders, and others who rose to the occasion under extraordinary circumstances. And so for those of us, brothers and sisters, who are still evolving, we want to bear witness to the pride, the dignity, the honor, and the genius of our sisters, so that we may proceed like those sisters and form a lead into the future. So if we can begin, we'll get back to black, we'll begin the slide presentation portion of the lecture. Now, this presentation is actually a tribute to black women liberators. And so we're going to deal with many personalities. We're going to look at Queen T and Queen Ahotep of the 18th dynastic period, dating back over 3,000 years ago. We're going to look at Queen Nzinga of Ndongo, which is present-day Angola, who fought the Portuguese for 40 years. We're going to look at Sojourner Truth, who was given the name Isabella Baumfree at birth, but she said that she would change her name to Sojourner because she would travel, and Truth because she would teach the truth to the people. And we have Harriet Tubman, who led hundreds of brothers and sisters north on the Underground Railroad. And Ida B. Wells, who was a crusader for justice. Fannie Lou Hamer, who was a grassroots activist, and Winnie Mandela, who fought against and is still fighting against white minority rule in South Africa. So you'll be able to see that our sisters have been in the struggle from ancient times to the modern day. And when we begin this presentation, we want to use the Akan symbol of the Sankofa bird, a bird that faces back, because you must go back and retrieve what we have lost. We must look back into the past so we can move into the future. And when we go back to the past, we can go back to ancient Kemet. And there on the temple walls, we'll see our ancestors who depicted the deities. Now here you have the god Amen, who was the hidden spirit within all of us, and his wife Mut, who was the goddess of maternity. Now, like I said, our ancestors believed that where there was a god, there was a goddess, and where there was a goddess, there was a god. Our ancestors did not believe in some white male, blonde-eyed, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, white guy, whatever it is. Whatever it is, but our ancestors didn't believe in that. Instead, they believed that our deities had to have a spouse. And each had responsibilities also. So here you have the great god Asaru, and he's sitting here on the throne because he was ruler of the spiritual realm. And behind him is his wife Aset with the throne on her head, because he was her executor or agent. But what this really means, brothers and sisters, is that she was the real power behind the throne, thus showing the balance between the African male and the African female. And we always show this slide, both Ashra and myself, because we want you to see that balance between the African male and the African female. Now, our ancestors who wanted to be God-like depicted themselves together. The man believed he was the personification of God on earth, and the woman believed that she was the personification of goddess on earth. When Europeans came into Kemet, called Egypt today, and they saw the African man and the African woman together, they didn't understand it because they had a hatred towards their own woman. And so they hacked the woman out of the monuments, much as if they have hacked the woman out of our history.
That's right.
But it was a king by the name of Ba-Neter who in the Archaic period, in the second dynastic period, over 5,000 years ago, who said women also had the right to rule the throne. Now get a good look at Ba-Neter here, because notice that wide nose and the thick lips. For anybody who thinks Egypt is a white civilization, you have to take a look at Ba-Neter here, who disproves that point. But there's no one prototype for an African facial characteristic or skin color, but there's no white person who could claim that type of nose or lips. But there were many queens who ruled Egypt. Some ruled with the king, others ruled for a young prince as a regent, and then there were other women who ruled Egypt independently. And the first one who ruled Egypt independently was named Menkaure-Nefertiti. And this was around the 6th dynastic period, over 4,000 years ago. And she was the daughter of a king by the name of Pepi II. Well, Menkaure-Nefertiti had a lot of legends that went out about her. And one legend was that she was in the Nile bathing, and her clothes and sandals were over on the bank. And a bird came by and saw them and picked up her sandal and flew all over the land and dropped it into the lap of the king. Well, the king saw this sandal and he thought it was so beautiful that he had to find the rightful owner. So he traveled all over the countryside looking for this owner of the sandal. And he searched high and low until he found Menkaure-Nefertiti. And then he married her and she became the queen. Does that story sound familiar? Yeah. It ought to, because that's where they got the Cinderella story from. But another story about Menkaure-Nefertiti is that after she and the king were married, that there were some conspirators who decided to assassinate the king. And so the queen said, I'm going to get revenge to those who have taken my husband's life. And so she invited them all to a dinner party. And so while they were there eating all the food and enjoying the dinner, she let up the floodgates of the Nile and drowned them all. So that sister got revenge for those who had killed her husband. But by the 12th dynastic period, there was a king by the name of Amenemhet III. Notice his locks. In fact, he looks a little bit like Brother Deruba right over there. But this was over 4,000 years ago. And Amenemhet III was one who built pyramids in the area of Harawa. And he also built a magnificent building known as the Labyrinth, 1,500 rooms above ground, 1,500 below. But when the king made his transition into the spiritual realm, there was no man to take the throne. So his daughter, by the name of Sobek-Neferu, had to step in and take the throne. And because she was such a beautiful sister, notice what the Europeans did to the side of her face. They knocked it out, hacked it out. But this sister also added to the labyrinth. And then she was the one who took the throne when there was no man available to do so. And after she made her transition, Egypt went into turmoil, and all types of foreign invaders came in. And one group was known as the Hyksos. And so a group of brothers and sisters from the south decided that they needed to rid Kemet of the Hyksos invaders and reclaim the throne. And the mother of the family was named Queen Tetisheri. And we have a question mark behind this particular statue because we're not sure if that's exactly her statue, but we do know the story of Tetisheri. Now, Tetisheri worked with her husband, Seqenen-Re-Tau II, in order to figure out ways to expel the Hyksos invaders from the land. And even their son, Seqenen-Re-Tau II, was killed on the battlefield, as you see where his head was hit by a hatchet. But although the brother lost his life, his wife, Queen Ahotep, had to continue the battle on her own. And her sons so admired her valor in battle that the sons wrote about her. The king's wife, the noble lady who knew everything, assembled Kemet. She looked after what her sovereign had established. She guarded it. She assembled her fugitives. She brought together her deserters. She pacified her upper Egyptians. She subdued her rebels. The king's wife, Ahotep, giving life. And because the queen was so valorous in battle, they gave her the Golden Fly Award, the Neb-Af. That was the highest award that you could get in ancient Egypt for being on the battlefield. And you know how a fly is? How it's so persistent, and even when you try to wave it away, it still comes after you? Well, that's what they felt about the best soldiers. They were the ones who still came after you no matter what. And so that's why they gave the Neb-Af to Queen Ahotep. But it was her son by the name of Amos who was the one who finally expelled the Hyksos invaders from the land. And when he did, he said, "Never again, never again." But it was his wife, Queen Amos-Nefertari, who co-reigned with him for 25 years. Her name means the most beautiful wife of Amos. And notice she's jet black and beautiful. And she's depicted that way. And once again, like we say, for those who want to try to tell you that Egypt is a white civilization, all you have to do is look at Queen Amos-Nefertari, that they called the most beautiful. But while they ruled for 25 years, the queen also formed a college of priestesses. And she was the first who had the title, the Neter-Hemp, the divine wife. And then when the king went on to make his transition, she co-reigned with their son, Amenhotep I. She guided him through the ways of rulership in Kemet. So that was Queen Amos-Nefertari, who co-reigned with both her husband and her son. And as time went on, their descendant, Queen Amos, was the one who took the throne along with her husband, Thutmose I. And Thutmose I wanted to extend the borders of Kemet because he was on the battlefield. And so Queen Amos had to take care of the home and take care of Kemet while he was on the battlefield. And so that was what she was known for doing. But their daughter was named a Queen Hatshepsut. And so she was one of the ones who's the most familiar to us of the Egyptian queens. And so after the Hyksos had been expelled, one of the things that Hatshepsut wanted to do was restore the damage that they had done to Kemet. And so this is what she said about herself. She said, "I have restored that which was in ruins. I have raised up that which was unfinished. Since the Asiatics were in the midst of Avaris of the Northland, and the barbarians were in the midst of them, the people of the Northland, overthrowing that which had been made while they ruled in the ignorance of Ra." So what she's saying is that those Hyksos were barbarians, and they ruled without God. And so that's what she felt about them.
And they still do it.
And they're still doing that today. Exactly. So Queen Hatshepsut was married to a king by the name of Thutmose II. And he was kind of a sickly man, and he died prior to them even being married very long. And there was no man available to take the throne. The only person available was his young son, Hatshepsut's stepson, known as Menkaperah Tahuti-Mese. And so since he was such a young man, Queen Hatshepsut ruled as regent for him. And so as time went on, she began to realize how she was very much equipped for ruling alone. And so she declared herself king and ruled alone, and let him go on and finish his education and also get schooled among the army. But one of the things that Hatshepsut built during the time when she ruled the throne was Zetzret Zetzru, this beautiful temple. It was called the most select and holy of places. She also decided that while she was reigning Kemet, that she wanted to send an expedition into Punt, which is present-day Somalia, and brought back goods for Kemet. So when we talk about Hatshepsut, however, many white Egyptologists will talk about Hatshepsut declaring herself king and wearing men's clothing, because they said, well, she's just a cross-dresser, because she wore the divine beard, the postiche, and she wore the shindet, which were used for rulership. But Queen Hatshepsut was not a cross-dresser. Queen Hatshepsut was wearing the clothes that you had to wear, the uniform for the job. For example, now if you're a female firefighter, you're gonna wear the same type of uniform that the male firefighter wears, right? If you're a female policewoman, you're not going to wear heels and stockings trying to run around trying to catch some criminals. You're going to wear the uniform for the job. So since Queen Hatshepsut declared herself king, she, as King Hatshepsut, was wearing the uniform for the job. And then, brothers and sisters, we had Amenhotep III. Now, this is another descendant of that same family of Queen Hatshepsut. And he was called by the ancient Kemetic people our dazzling son. And he was a magnificent builder. And he designed these lotus columns that you can still see today out on the Luxor temple. And now these are these little toothpick columns right here were the ones that the Greeks did much later. But these are the magnificent columns designed by Amenhotep III. And so one of the things that Amenhotep III was noted for was that he dispensed with tradition by marrying a young queen by the name of Ti, because her parents were the ones who actually worked for him, and they were considered commoners. But Queen Ti was a quite magnificent woman, and Amenhotep III put her on the throne to rule with him because she was well equipped to do so. And so the king so loved the queen that not only did he put her on the throne with him, but he also created a lake for her called Lake of Ti, 1 mile long and 1/5 of a mile wide. So he knew what to do for his woman. But Queen Ti had a beautiful library with numerous scientific and religious texts. And when the king began to get weak, when he became ill, the foreign diplomats corresponded with Queen Ti. And it was their son later, Akhenaten, who took the throne. And he wasn't much interested in governmental duties, so it was Queen Ti who had to step in as the world's first Secretary of State and rule for him. So that was the world's first Secretary of State, Queen Ti. And by the 19th dynastic period, we're talking around 1298 BC, the wife of Ursa-Ma'at-Ra-Sep-Tepin-Ra-Ra-Mesu-Meri-Amen was named Nefertari-Meri-Mut, the most beautiful loved by Mut. Now, she was a woman who was very skilled in her own right prior to marrying a famous man, because she ruled with her father, who was the king of Nubia, prior to marrying Ramses II. But when they did get married, this king so loved the queen that he would come up with these magnificent statues, and you'd look at the statue. Now, this is his leg right here, and this is the depiction of the queen right at his kneecap. And so when you see it, and then when white folks see it, they'll say, well, he just thought he was superior to the woman. But that wasn't the case, brothers and sisters. The king depicted himself so large and the queen in front to indicate that you have to come through me to get through her. So that was the real feeling that the king had for the queen. He also depicted her on the front of the temple at Abu Simbel, and he built a temple for her directly next to his. And this was the first time a sovereign had ever put a woman on the front of the temple at the same height that he is. It was Ramses, or Ursa Ma'at-Ra, Septepen-Ra's grandson by the name of Seti II, who took the throne after him. Well, not directly after him, but a few generations after him. And his wife was named Queen Tausret. Well, after Seti II made his transition, there was a lot of fighting for the throne. And so Queen Tausret had to evict another person by the name of Amen-Mas off the throne, and she co-reigned with a brother by the name of Siptah. But this is an example of brothers and sisters working together in order to achieve what they felt was rightly theirs.
How to do it.
And by the 25th dynastic period, around the time period of 690 BC, we had a brother by the name of Taharka. And these brothers, who were Nubian brothers came from the south, wanted to restore Kemet to its former glory. But what Brother Taharka wanted to do was he had a close connection to the female relatives of his family. And so one of the things that the brothers from the south always made sure that they would do was set up a mistress of what they is in present-day Luxor, that they call Mistress of Thebes, and also a mistress of Cush. And they put their female relatives on the throne. And so also when he was crowned king, he sent for his mother to come to be there at the coronation. So she had to travel about 1,200 miles in order to be there for him. But these queen rulers of the south were known as Kentakes. These were the queen rulers. And in this area of northern Sudan, they built pyramids there. And this is the area of Merowe. They also built magnificent temples, and in fact, the Kentake is shown on the front of the temple. And notice, if you see, she has some very well-endowed buttocks. Looks like a lot of sisters that we know today.
All right, then.
But one thing about these Kentakes was not only were they builders and administrators, they also led the armies into battle. And in fact, Cheikh Anta Diop talks about one particular Kentake in his book, The African Origin of Civilization. And he says, when the Indo-European world acquired enough military strength to conquer the old countries that had civilized it, they encountered the fierce, unyielding resistance of a queen whose determined struggle symbolized the national pride of a people who, until then, had commanded others. This was Queen Kentake of the Meroitic Sudan. She impressed all antiquity by her stand at the head of her troops against the Roman armies of Augustus Caesar. The loss of an eye in battle only redoubled her courage. Her fearlessness and scorn of death even forced the admiration of a chauvinist like Strabo. This queen had courage above her sex. So even though this sister lost her eye in battle, she still continued the fight. So we're talking about somebody who didn't turn around. So now you've seen a kind of a background. We laid a foundation here from ancient Kemet. And so we talked about many of the queens from ancient Kemet. So what we're going to do now is link them to sisters in more recent history. Now, we talked about Queen Menkaure-Netakerti and how she got revenge on those who had conspired and killed her husband. So that motive of revenge, I began to think about it. I saw it later on in our history. I saw it on those slave ships when Africans were brought over here to this country captives in deplorable conditions. It wasn't just black men on those slave ships, it was black men and black women. And as Anthony Tibbles tells us, the women's relative freedom of mobility allowed them to move about and communicate with one another in a fashion which men could not. In some cases, as on board the Amistad in 1839, women took advantage of that freedom to plan revolts or attacks on the white sailors who enslaved them. Yet when we hear about the Amistad, the only person we ever hear about is Senku. Little did we know it was those sisters who made it possible for those brothers to take over the ship. Like Minkaranetta Curti, they avenged the wrong. We also saw that need to avenge a wrong in present-day Ghana, called the Gold Coast, because of all the gold the Europeans were coming in and taking out. Around 1900, they had managed to subdue many of the people, including the Ashanti. Their king was banished, along with the son of Yah Asantewaa. But the ultimate insult occurred, brothers and sisters, when the British governor, Sir Frederick Hodgson, asked for the golden stool so he could sit on it. Now that was the ultimate insult, because the golden stool was said to have descended from heaven and fallen into the lap of the king Osi Tutu. So when that happened, many of the men got quiet to plan what they were going to do. But it was a sister, Yah Asantewaa, who said, we sisters are going to arm ourselves and we're going to go and fight against the British. That sister didn't play. You see, she's well armed. And whenever we go to Ghana, we always pay homage to our sister. She used guerrilla tactics and was able to elude capture for over a year. And when the British soldier finally did catch her, she spat in his face. But like Minkaranetta Curti and those sisters aboard the Amistad, she worked to avenge a wrong. We also saw that in Kenya, when Harry Thuku was arrested for fighting against the white colonialists in 1922, thousands came to demonstrate outside his cell. But the men were being easily appeased. So Mary Yanjiro stripped naked, and she admonished the men for being cowards. She said, you take my dress and give me your trousers. You men are cowards. What are you waiting for? Our leader is in there, let's get him. And then at that point, the crowd moved to action. But we also saw that same need to avenge a wrong in 1892, Memphis, Tennessee. Three brothers had a grocery store, Thomas Moss, Henry Stewart, and Calvin McDowell. And because the store did so well, the white power structure couldn't take it. And so they attacked the brothers. And because they had the nerve to defend themselves, those brothers were lynched. But a sister vowed to avenge that wrong. That sister stood only about 4 feet 6 inches tall, but she was known as the Princess of the Press, Ida B. Wells, later Barnett. She said she was going to pack 2 pistols and went to investigate lynchings, and she found that not only our brothers were being lynched, peace be upon their souls, but our sisters too were being lynched, like Laura Nelson, who was lynched for a crime that her son was said to have committed. And Ida B. Wells went on the anti-lynching lecture circuit, and she told the world about it. She put this information in books like a red record, a 3-year statistical record on lynching and lynch law in Georgia. And then when one of the speeches that she gave, you see here she is speaking right along with Marcus Garvey, December 18, 1919. Can you imagine? It doesn't get any better than that. Marcus Garvey and Ida B. Wells? Woo! And by the way, brothers and sisters, this flyer came from the Military Intelligence Division, which was a forerunner for the FBI. They were spying on them back then as well. As well as now. But long before Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus, Ida B. Wells fought and bit a conductor who tried to remove her from a train. Then she sued the railroad company too. But our sister was a crusader for justice, and she said vigilance is the price of liberty. Like Minka Rodnetta Curti, like those sisters aboard the Amistad, and like our sisters in Kenya, Yanjeri, they all worked to avenge a wrong. Now we mentioned Sobek Neferu, how she had to step in and take the lead because she was best equipped to do so. We also saw that in Jamaica, where brothers and sisters were brought there to work the land, just like we were brought here. And if you didn't work hard enough and fast enough, you were put on the rack and beaten. Those who managed to escape and form their own communities were known as Maroons. And the leader of the Windward Jamaican Maroons was known as Queen Nanny. And this is a book about her called The Mother of Us All. Now, there were a lot of stories about Queen Nanny. One said that she kept a kettle of water boiling without fire, so British soldiers could fall into her pots. Her people also believed that she could catch British bullets with her buttocks and then fire them right back at the enemy. That sister didn't play. So during the First Maroon War from 1720 to 1739, she led the Windward Maroons through some of the fiercest fighting against the British. She encouraged them to use leaves as camouflage, and she led about 800 Africans for over 50 years. In fact, her guerrilla warfare tactics were even studied by military strategists for the Vietnam War. But she led the way for African freedom struggles throughout the world. So just like Sobek Neferu, she stepped in and took the lead because she was best equipped to do so. We also saw that with Harriet Tubman. And our sister said, I freed thousands of slaves. I could have freed thousands more if they had known they were slaves. And you know what, brothers and sisters? We still got that today. But she had that in her own family. And when she first, in 1849, planned this to escape, she told her husband, John Tubman. Well, John wasn't interested in going. In fact, he even said he was going to tell Massa that she was planning to go. But it's a shame. But as you know, she went on anyway because she knew those torture devices. She knew about those neck locks and those bell collars that were given to those brothers and sisters who had what white folks said was a disease called drapetomania, meaning they were going to escape. They called that a disease. But she became one of the most reliable leaders in the Underground Railroad. In fact, she also became the first woman in American military history to plan, execute an armed raid on enemy forces. In fact, not the first black woman, but the first woman, period. And this was the raid on the Combahee River where she helped free 750 Africans. But our sister, known as Black Moses, her slogan was move or die. And she said, on my Underground Railroad, I never ran my train off the track and I never lost a passenger. She stepped in and took the lead because she was best equipped to do so. Just like the three queens of the Virgin Islands. These were, in 1878, three former enslaved ladies initiated a revolt. And this revolt was called Fireburn. They were Queen Mary, Queen Agnes, and Queen Matilda. These were the sisters who burned down the area there. This was in the Virgin Islands, and these were the three queens. And you see her, one had a light to lead the way. We also had another sister to step in and take the lead because she was best equipped to do so. Her name was Serenia, and she was known as the Panther Queen. She was the woman who opposed the bayonets with the strength of her soul and the white man's tricks with the traditions of Africa. In 1899, two Frenchmen wanted to take over the area around Lake Chad. And when they were burning down villages and taking brothers and sisters captives. But when they came to Osna land, the symbol of the Osna people was the Black Panther. And the leader of the Osna people was a girl known as Serenia. She had been trained from the time she was very young in leadership. So when she found that the French were coming, she had a wall built around Osna land. And she sent the elders and the children away so that they would be safe. And then she summoned all her soldiers, brothers and sisters. And she told them that, brothers and sisters, it's time to go to war. And she also summoned those others in other groups to help. And she said, brothers and sisters coming from afar, you're welcome in Osna country. We don't speak the same tongue, we don't have the same beliefs, but we share the same will, the will to live free. And then she rode ahead of her troops and going to battle against the French. And she was able to defeat them, brothers and sisters, with the power of her spear. And then while the others in Osna land were celebrating, she went and locked herself up in the palace. And they couldn't figure out, well, why isn't she out here celebrating with us? You know, she should be enjoying this victory that we have. But all of a sudden, brothers and sisters, the doors of the palace flung open, and a Black Panther emerged. That was Serenia going to continue the battle. She stepped in and took the lead, just like Sobek Neferu, Harriet Tubman, Queen Nanny. They took the lead because they were best equipped to do so. Also, Gloria Richardson in Cambridge, Maryland. She called for an end to discrimination in housing, education, and hiring. Now, this was in the 1960s. She became the leader of the Cambridge Nonviolent Action Committee, which was also an affiliate of SNCC. That sister was serious. She led the brothers and sisters there in protests and demonstrations and also boycotts of downtown businesses. Her actions caught the attention of John Kennedy, who was the president at that time. So he sent his brother, Robert Kennedy, into Cambridge to try to do something about Gloria Richardson. But what the sister did, she educated him that it wasn't about desegregation, but it was about poverty and joblessness, and that's what they were fighting against. She became one of the most feared and militant, what they call up South leaders, because the sister said nonviolence is all right, but sometimes you have to use violent means. And in Cambridge, the official said, we can't deal with her and we can't deal without her. In fact, a SNCC worker named Cleveland Sellers talked about Gloria Richardson's encounter that she had with the National Guardsmen. He said, we marched about 3 blocks before we saw the National Guardsmen. I noticed they were armed with rifles. Each of the rifles had a bayonet attached to the end of the muzzle. I looked at Gloria. We still had time to turn around. It was a crucial moment, the kind that could make or break a movement. We all understood that Gloria was the only one who could decide its outcome. If she had told us to return to the lodge, we would have done so, even though we wouldn't have wanted to. Instead, brothers and sisters, Gloria Richardson went toe-to-toe with the National Guard. You see her right in front, just pushing that bayonet out the way. She said, get that thing out of my face. She stepped in and took the lead because she was best equipped to do so. We talked about Queen Ahotep, how she had to continue the battle despite the loss of a loved one. We also saw that with the wives of Gabriel Prosser and Nat Turner. because we're told in Black Women in Resistance that their wives were very much involved in their revolts. Prosser's wife, Nancy Prosser, as well as Nat Turner's wife, Cherry Turner. They were also a strong force in planning those revolts as well. But they had to continue the battle despite the loss of a loved one. Just like Nkosi Kaze, Nobandle, Nomzamo, Madi Kazela, known today as Winnie Mandela. Hear it again. Nkosi Kaze, Nobandle, Nomzamo, Madi Kazela. Our sister said there's only one person who's oppressed in this country. He's black. Uprisings are bound to be the order of the day because our struggle here has been reduced by the white man by his choice to black versus white. Our sister worked along with her husband Nelson at that time as part of the ANC, the African National Congress. And she saw the squalid conditions in which our brothers and sisters had to live. And she saw these signs like this one for use by white persons, how they reserve the best for themselves. She saw signs like this one: danger, natives, Indians, and coloreds. If you enter these premises at night, you'll be listed as missing. Armed guards shoot on sight, and savage dogs devour your corpse. You have been warned. So she devoted her life to fighting against it. During the time Nelson was imprisoned, Winnie was beaten, detained, and jailed. Yet she said, "I'm a living symbol of the white man's fear." She was very much involved in many of the struggles against apartheid. And then when Nelson came out of Victor Versa Prison Farm on February 11, 1990, she was right there to meet him. But in the authorized biography of Mandela, Peter Magubani, who was a friend of both Winnie and Nelson, said that without Winnie, Nelson wouldn't have been what he is. When newspapers could not write about him, she could have his problems publicized. Without her, ANC would have been forgotten. She was the only person who stood by ANC and said, "I dare you to stop me." She was prepared to die for it. Now, how many of those brothers and sisters, supposed activists, would you say would be ready to die for it, like Winnie Mandela? Very few, brothers and sisters. Winnie said it was Lillian Ngoyi who was the one who influenced her, because Lillian Ngoyi was president of the Federation of South African Women and president of the ANC Women's League in the 1950s. She was subjected to restrictions and bannings because in 1956 she led 20,000 women in South Africa against passbook protests. And when she made her transition in 1980, she was still under banning orders. But we talked about Queen Amos Nefertari, how she worked along with her husband, Queen Amos. We have many situations in which brothers and sisters work together. Like in Haiti, in August of 1791, Boukman Dutty presided over a ceremony that we know about, but there was also a sister involved in that ceremony. Her name was Cecile Fatman, and she was a priestess. She prophesied that there would be a slave revolt. And that sister then, they worked together and they sacrificed a pig, took an oath, and Boukman and Cecile encouraged their listeners to fight bravely against their oppressors there in Haiti. Days later, the Haitian Revolution began, and a week later, 1,800 plantations had been destroyed and 1,000 slaveholders killed. So that's what we talk about, brothers and sisters working together. We also saw that in Zimbabwe. In the 19th century, many Europeans began to come into Zimbabwe. And the brothers and sisters there were trying to figure out about what to do. They needed a spiritual leader. And it was Mbuya Nahanda who joined forces with Brother Kaguri. And they spearheaded armed resistance against those settler forces. They were able to unify the Shona and the Ndebele people. In fact, they had a lot of slogans, and one was, "The white cobra must die." Another one said, "The white man would be hunted down like game." And they used guerrilla tactics. But unfortunately, brothers and sisters, they didn't have the arms to compete against the Maxim guns and the dynamite. So Mbuya Nahanda and Brother Kaguri were later captured, and they were executed. But they represented uncompromising resistance to every form of foreign domination during the uprisings of 1896 and 1897. In fact, right before her execution, but even though she knew she was going to die, Mbuya Nahanda said, "My bones will rise again and another Nihanda will come and take my place." And in fact, she did in 1972. But she was one of the many who died for the liberation of the motherland. And how about Empress Taitu? She is known as the Light of Ethiopia. She worked along with her husband, Emperor Menelik II. And this was during the Battle of Adwa in 1896, brothers and sisters. This was when the Italians were trying to come in and colonialize Ethiopia. But many brothers and sisters, the Ethiopians, lost their lives on the battlefield. But they kept coming, over 100,000. And Empress Taitu had her own troops in the battle. In fact, she was the one who was responsible for cutting off the Italians' water supply, and this enabled the Ethiopian forces to defeat the Italians in the Battle of Adwa, March 1st, 1896. That ought to be a day of celebration for all of us. Adwa, this was the Battle of Adwa, and there that sister, she's taking them captive. Look at her, she got her revolver in her hand. That was a bad sister. In fact, her soldiers were known as the Black Lions. You notice he's got the lion's mane on his head and underneath his chin. This came from the Ethiopian lion, who has a very dark mane. They're smaller than other lions, but just as tough. And one of the most serious black lions of them all was Empress Taitu of Ethiopia, who worked along with her husband, Emperor Menelik. Another case of brothers and sisters working together was Field Marshal Muthoni Karima. She worked with Dedan Kimathi in Kenya, and they were fighting against the colonial forces, against the British. She lived in the forest for 12 years. And during that time, they fought against the British military with handmade guns and traditional weapons. And she proved herself to be such of a natural leader that she attained the rank of Field Marshal. And Dedan Kimathi called her the Weaver Bird because she was able to weave brilliant strategies in the struggle for Kenyan independence. And in fact, the sister is still alive. She's an elder now. And she talks about the intense hunger and how it was in the forest when the soldiers surrounded them. How sometimes she had to eat animal skin in order to survive. And she later said her locks represent the history of Kenya because they're gray at the roots, but they go all the way down to the floor, and they're black there. But she was beaten and wounded by gunfire, but she was never captured. This is another case of brothers and sisters working together. Just like Amy Jake Garvey. She said, "Stand on your own two black feet and fight like hell for your place in the world." She was the wife of that great leader, Marcus Mosiah Garvey. He founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association, and with the slogan, "One God, one aim, one destiny." And it's because of Amy Jake Garvey that we know as much about Marcus Garvey as we do today. because during his imprisonment for alleged mail fraud, she was the one who carried on his work and helped stimulate a rebirth in Garveyism. She was the one who wrote the Pledge of Allegiance for the UNIA. She also wrote books like Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, Garvey and Garveyism, and Black Power in America. But she wasn't the first Mrs. Marcus Garvey. It was Amy Ashwood Garvey who was the first Mrs. Marcus Garvey and one of the first members of the UNIA. She later moved to London, but she was a strong Pan-Africanist in her own right. She played an important role in Black British history by founding the Nigerian Progress Union. She was also a founding member of the International African Friends of Abyssinia, which was also designed to give Ethiopia aid against Italy when Italy tried again in the 1900s to attack Ethiopia, as well as chairing the 5th Pan-African Congress. Henrietta Benton was also a strong Garveyite, and Marcus Garvey called her the greatest woman of the Negro race today. She was a Shakespearean actress who put her reputation on the line to work for the UNIA in 1917. She traveled extensively throughout the Caribbean to recruit for the UNIA and became known as she received the Order of the Lady Commander of the Sublime Order of the Nile. That was Henrietta Benton, a strong a Garveyite, as well as Queen Mother Moore, who was also a strong Garveyite. She said, "My bones are tired, not tired of struggling, but tired of oppression." In fact, she said when Marcus Garvey was coming to Louisiana, that the sheriff said that they weren't going to allow him to speak. So all the brothers and sisters armed themselves. In fact, she said she had a pistol in her purse and one in her bosom. And of course, when the sheriff stepped out going to try to stop Marcus Garvey, all the brothers and sisters pulled their weapons on him, and of course he let Marcus Garvey speak. But Queen Mother Moore was involved and agitated in many of the struggles, like that of the Scottsboro Boys. She said, "I'm not a part-time struggler. I'm in the movement for the liberation of African people full-time, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day for life." That was Queen Mother Moore. And she was also part of Malcolm X's Organization of Afro-American Unity and called for reparations back in the 1960s. But Queen Mother Moore was a strong Garveyite. While a very surprising Garveyite was Madam C.J. Walker. And when many of us see Madam C.J. Walker, we say, "Oh, she was just a hair straightener." But there's a lot more to Madam C.J. Walker than that. In fact, you ought to read the book about her that her great-great-granddaughter wrote called On Her Own Ground, The Life and Times of Madam C.J. Walker. And in fact, if you say she's just a hair straightener, you're actually copying what the white press said about her. But Alelia Bundles, her great-great-granddaughter, tells us that she was given the name Sarah Breedlove at birth. And she grew up on the Bernie Plantation in Delta, Louisiana. Well, at that time, sisters had to work from can't see in the morning to can't see at night, so they didn't have a lot of time to deal with their hair. And many of them developed scalp diseases. Well, because of that, their hair began to fall out. And that's what happened to Madam Walker. So she worked with a lot of different ingredients to try to find something that would make her hair come back. And in fact, she said that an African man came to her in a dream, and he gave her the formulation for Madam C.J. Walker's wonderful hair grower. And that product took off and made her a wealthy woman. In fact, she was a marketing genius. She'd show pictures like this: before using Madam C.J. Walker's wonderful hair grower and after. And the products took off. They flew off the shelves. But she also wanted to empower women of African descent. So she made them Walker agents. And they would sell her products. And so this is a meeting of the Walker agents. So long before any Mary Kay and Avon and all that kind of stuff, Madam C.J. Walker had her own sales force. And this is her mansion. It was called Villa Lawaro, that was built by Vertner Tandy, the first black licensed architect in New York. But not only did she use this building for her meetings of the Walker agents, but she also used it for her activist friends to have a place to meet. People like Ida B. Wells, James Weldon Johnson, who wrote the Black National Anthem, and even Marcus Garvey brothers and sisters. All of them were able to have their meetings at Villa Lawaro. She was also very philanthropic and gave large amounts of money to groups like the Colored YMCA, Marcus Garvey's UNIA, and the NAACP. But when she prepared her passport application in February of 1919, she had no idea her political and social activities had been monitored by government agents like Walter Loving, Hallie Queen, R.D. Jonas, and other government spies. These were the agents of that day, brothers and sisters, and they were going back and reporting on what Madam C.J. Walker was doing. Same thing going on, nothing changed. And because she was so philanthropic, 3 days before she lost consciousness, her doctor heard her say, "I want to live to help my race." How many rich brothers and sisters today, how many of those entertainers, actors, or whatever, none of them would say, "I want to live to help my race"? That was Madam C.J. Walker, a strong Garveyite. But Madam Walker influenced many others, like Viola Desmond in Canada. Now, she couldn't learn how to do hair in Canada, so she went to Madam Walker's school in New York. And she later became known as Canada's Rosa Parks, although she came before Rosa Parks, because she was arrested for refusing to give up her seat in a movie theater. And she was thrown in jail. But later in Canada, they had to issue an apology, a pardon to her. And it was Carrie Bess who founded Nova Scotia's first newspaper for blacks, who wrote about Viola Desmond's story. They organized and lobbied and finally repealed the law against segregation in 1954 in Canada. Maggie Lena Walker, she was very philanthropic. She said, "I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth, but instead with a clothes basket on my head." She found that white-owned banks didn't want to take deposits from black organizations. So she said, "Let's have a bank that'll take the nickels and turn them into dollars." And that sister, when St. Luke Penny Savings Bank opened in 1903, she became the first woman bank president in the United States. Not the first black woman bank president, but the first woman bank president, period. So that was Maggie Lena Walker. And she was in Richmond, Virginia. Also in Richmond, Virginia was Mary Elizabeth Bowser. Now, Mary Elizabeth Bowser was a slave at the Van Loo Mansion in Richmond. Well, when the father of that family, John Van Loo, died, he did something real strange. Well, he didn't, he died, but the white women in his family did something strange. Like Elizabeth Van Loo here, who they call Crazy Bet, because she was doing all kind of crazy things, like she let the slaves go free that they had. And she sent Mary Elizabeth off to Philadelphia to go to school. So while Mary Elizabeth was there, they called her to come back to Richmond and pose as a slave in the White House of the Confederacy under Jefferson Davis. And so Mary Elizabeth Bowser was secretly reading all the documents of the Confederacy. And she'd go back and tell Crazy Bet, and Crazy Bet would tell General Grant, and it was Mary Elizabeth Bowser who helped bring down the Confederacy in Richmond, Virginia. sister, she was a real actress. She acted like a complete nitwit, but she risked her life for liberty. That was Mary Elizabeth Bowser. We talked about Hatshepsut, how she wore the clothes to do the job. Now, we also saw that with Queen Nzinga. Now, what would she have looked like wearing some fancy dress as she led her troops into battle? So she also had to dress in men's garments, but those were the clothes to do the job, because Queen Nzinga stayed on the military offensive, and she sent ambassadors throughout West and Central Africa to enlist a coalition of African armies to eject the Portuguese. And when she had to meet with the Portuguese, they didn't want to give her a seat. And so one of her servants got down on their hands and knees, and Queen Nzinga conducted her meeting. So you can imagine how the Portuguese were the ones who were fooled in that exchange. They had wanted to humble her, and they were the ones who ended up getting embarrassed in the whole process. But like Hatshepsut, she wore the clothes to do the job. Just like Ellen Craft. Now when we look at Ellen Craft, we say she looked so light she could have passed for white. Well, that's what she did in order to escape from slavery. She dressed as a young white gentleman and called herself Mr. Johnson. Now, this is the real way of dressing for success, brothers and sisters. She had her husband, William Craft, to pose as her slave. And they went on train, on foot, on boat, running 1,000 miles for freedom. That was the escape of William and Ellen Craft from slavery. She wore the clothes to do the job. We talked about Queen T, how she was a first in government. We also had Shirley Chisholm, who was the first black woman in the House of Representatives. She also ran for president in 1972. What's interesting about Shirley Chisholm is her father was a Garveyite. And so he would take her to meetings when she was a very young girl. So this helped to develop her political thought. And she summed up her views in the 1970 book, Unbought and Unbossed. She said, for our freedom struggle to advance in the political arena, black politicians have to accept their blackness. They have to form an ideological base from which to operate, and that base has to be founded on their color. That was Shirley Chisholm, a first in government, who said unbossed and unbought like Queen T. She was a first in government. We talked about Nefertari Murray Mutt, who had been an accomplished woman prior to marrying a famous man. We also saw that with Islanda Good Robeson, who was the wife of Paul Robeson, the singer, actor, and activist. Well, she was a writer, an anthropologist, and she was also his drama coach, acting agent, and manager. She helped to progress his entire roles on the stage. But when she was working on her doctorate in anthropology, she was told by white people that she was more like them than Africans. So the sister said, I'm going to disprove that point. And so she took their young son, Paul, who you see here, and they went on an African journey. They went from West Africa to South Africa to East Africa and back to London. And she found that on her travels that white people looked at Africa as a land ripe for exploitation, and they looked at African people to be exploited as well. And she devoted her life to fighting against all types of racism, colonialism, and oppression. During the time when she and Paul began to be in touch with those in the Soviet Union, they were labeled Reds or communists, and they lost a lot of work. But yet she continued to fight. But she was an accomplished woman prior to marrying a famous man. Just like Shirley Graham Du Bois, who was a writer, composer, and activist prior to marrying W.E.B. Du Bois. In fact, she married him when she was middle-aged and he was in his 80s. And because they were persecuted during the so-called Red Scare, they moved to Ghana, where Kwame Nkrumah had become president. And there she became head of Ghanaian television because Kwame Nkrumah wanted to bring about positive images in television. She looked at people like Kwame Ture as her son. Also, she looked at Malcolm X as one of her sons, and they came to visit her as well. But she traveled extensively. And when she traveled to China, she ran into Robert F. Williams. He had been head of the Monroe, North Carolina NAACP. But because they believed in armed self-reliance versus nonviolence, he lost his position in the Monroe NAACP. In fact, this is one of their meetings. Doesn't look like the NAACP we know today, does it? But Brother Robert F. Williams was accused of kidnapping some white folks. And he had to end up going on a modern-day underground railroad with his family in tow, a machine gun on his back, and 500 FBI agents after him. He went to Canada and then later to Cuba, where he had a radio show called Radio Free Dixie. In fact, this is his wife, Mabel, and he's teaching her how to shoot. Well, it was a good thing he did because Mabel was the one who held off the police from getting Robert F. Williams when they came after him in Monroe, North Carolina. They knew about that racist police force and that savage Klan. So Robert F. Williams wrote a book called Negroes with Guns. That's a serious title, isn't it? It sends shivers into But that book influenced groups and people like Bobby Seale and Huey Newton, who formed the Black Panther Party. And of course, sisters played important roles as well in the Black Panther Party. In fact, one former Black Panther sister who later became part of the African Liberation Army was Assata Shakur, meaning Assata, she who struggles, Olugbala for the people, Shakur meaning thankful. She was stopped while driving while black on the New Jersey Turnpike. She was with Zaid Shakur and Sundiata Acoli. And Zaid Shakur lost his life during that battle. Assata was wounded, and then she was later imprisoned, as well as Sundiata Acoli. But somehow she managed to escape. And she ended up in Cuba, where she is today. Still strong, still defiant, and you can read about her in the book Assata, an autobiography. Our sister said a woman's place is in the struggle. That is Assata Shakur. We talked about Queen Taoshret, how she had to use strength and determination. That was also the case with Sojourner Truth, who walked off the plantation and declared herself free. Just walked off. She went on the anti-slavery lecture circuit and she was able to shame white folks. She then became a part of the Freedmen's Bureau and was a nurse during the Civil War. She used strength and determination, like Mary Ellen Pleasant, who said, "I'd rather be a corpse than a coward." She was the one who gave John Brown his money for the raid on Harper's Ferry. And she became known as the leader of the civil rights movement in California. That was Mary Ellen Pleasant, who used strength and determination. Just like Mary Ann Shadd Carey. Her family moved to Canada after the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act, and she edited a newspaper called the Provincial Freedman. She was an abolitionist and the first African female newspaper editor in North America. But not only that, she opened a school, became the second woman in the U.S. to receive a law degree, was a public speaker, recruited for the Union Army, and advocated to vote for black women. She founded the Colored Women's Progressive Franchise. She said, "It's better to wear out than rust out." That was Mary Ann Shadd Carey. She used strength and determination like Drusilla Dunjee Houston, who wrote the wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Kushite Empire. She used a variety of sources. This wasn't the time of the internet where you have easy access to information. She used history, anthropology, geography, ethnology to write that book. And then she wrote W.E.B. Du Bois in a letter thanking him for inspiring her. And she told him that this book was not for the white race. She wasn't trying to reach the white race. Her book was dedicated to people of African descent. She used strength and determination, just like Mary McLeod Bethune. She said, I'm my mother's daughter, and the drums of Africa still beat in my heart. They'll not let me rest while there's a single Negro boy or girl without a chance to prove his worth. She took $1.50 and built a school on a dump site, and that school's still in existence today, Bethune-Cookman College. She used strength and determination. Just like Septima Poinsett Clark, she was a teacher in the Charleston, South Carolina school system, but she lost that position because she was part of what they call a radical group, the NAACP. But she said, I have a great belief in the fact that whenever there is chaos, it creates wonderful thinking. I consider chaos a gift. And brothers and sisters, you know sometimes we may have a lot of chaos. That only means we have a lot of gifts. But she became a teacher in the Highlander Folk School in Tennessee, where she taught brothers and sisters who wanted to be able to register to vote. But you can always tell the mark of an excellent teacher by her students. And one of her best students was Sister Rosa Parks. When Rosa Parks came to Highlander Folk School, there they had classes for people who were already activists. And they planned on what they were going to do in their communities. So at Highlander Folk School, Rosa Parks said, nothing ever happens in Montgomery. So as we know, she made something happen in Montgomery. She got arrested for refusing to give up her seat on the bus. But that wasn't a one-time act for Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks had been an activist in the Montgomery NAACP, as you see her here. She was a secretary. And Rosa Parks had had a run-in with the same bus driver on the same bus 12 years before, because she knew what happened with those buses. When brothers and sisters would go up to the front and put their money in, many times those racist cracker bus drivers would pull right on off, and before they could ever get back on the back of the bus. And so she vowed to fight against that, along with Joanne Gibson Robinson, who was president of the Women's Political Council in Montgomery, Alabama. When she found that Rosa Parks had been arrested, she stayed up all night mimeographing handbills, and she had her students from Alabama State College to pass out those handbills all throughout the community. And this was how the Montgomery bus boycott got started. She wrote the book called The Montgomery Bus Boycott and the Women Who Started It. So long before the preachers got involved, it was the sisters who were giving the workers rides to work. Long before the preachers came, it was those sisters who started that Montgomery bus boycott. And because they knew Rosa Parks was so strong and would not fall, that's why she became the symbol of that movement. But Rosa Parks said, many black people before me were arrested for defying the bus laws. They prepared the way. She's talking about people like Irene Morgan Kirkaday, who refused to give up her seat on a Greyhound bus to a white couple. She tore up the arrest warrant, and then she kicked the sheriff in the groin. And in 1946, the Supreme Court declared segregated seating on interstate buses was unconstitutional. That sweet little sister, Irene Morgan Kirkaday, said, I did what I did because it was right. But in South Africa, too, women helped to head a bus boycott. And that was in Alexandria, where 15,000 men and women walked 18 miles per day for 9 days. This was in 1943. And then they did it again in 7 weeks, for 7 weeks in 1944. And this was to protest bus fares. It was also led by a sister again. Her name was Florence Mposho, and she was secretary of the ANC Women's League. 25,000 brothers and sisters participated, and after 5 months, what they called the Native Transportation Amendment rolled back the fare increase. So that was nothing new. This was Florence Mposho. But just as it was both brothers and sisters in South Africa who were hit by tear gas, and just like brothers and sisters here who were hit by those fire hoses, it wasn't just brothers, but it was brothers and sisters who were bitten by dogs. And it was even little brothers, like little Anthony Quinn here, who's only 5 years old, but fighting the Mississippi Highway Patrolman. I love that little brother right there. That's a serious little brother. But it was Ella Baker, who had been a veteran of many of the civil rights organizations for a time period of about 50 years. And Ella Baker said, people have to be made to understand that they cannot look for salvation anywhere but to themselves. And when she realized that the students were beginning to have the lunch counter sit-ins, and the students were gearing up for protests in the 1960s, she had them to meet at Shaw University. And out of that meeting emerged SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And they had 2 directions. One was voter registration and the other one was direct action, where you had to learn how to be nonviolent. You had to have smoke blown in your face. You had to sit there and be spit on and called names, and you couldn't react. You had to learn how to deal with this, brothers and sisters. And one of the leaders of direct action for SNCC was Diane Nash, and she was one who had been mentored by Ella Baker. She was also the leader of the sit-in movement, the lunch counter sit-in movement in Nashville, Tennessee. And Nashville became the first southern city to desegregate lunch counters. So we had the pleasure of meeting Sister Diane Nash when she came to Kemet with us in 2009. And because of her actions for our people, we honored Diane Nash. We gave her the name Merneet, who was the goddess of war, Ma'at Kara, truth, justice, and righteousness, the spirit under Ra, and we also called her the Wep Wawet. The Wep Wawet was the opener of the way. And we honored Diane Nash with that title, the Wep Wawet, because she was the one who led the way and opened the way for all of us. And I told them on the trip, I said, every time you sit down in a restaurant, you need to thank this sister. Every time you go to vote, you need to thank that sister. Every time you go to a hotel, you need to thank that sister. But the sister's still strong, still in the struggle for all of us. Sister Diane Nash. And then, brothers and sisters, we talked about the Kentuckys, how one of them lost an eye in battle against Augustus Caesar, but she continued the fight. And I thought back, I said, wait a minute, I can think of a modern day one-eyed Kentucky, a sharecropper who was the daughter of sharecroppers. She walked off the plantation and went to register to vote at age 45. And then she went to register others. She went to Winona, Mississippi, and she was beaten so badly that she received a blood clot over her eye. Yet she continued to fight for us. She became a modern one-eyed Kentucky. I'm talking about Fannie Lou Hamer of Montgomery County, Mississippi. She said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Fannie Lou Hamer also started the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and she said it's by risking life that freedom is obtained. When I liberate others, I liberate myself. Fannie Lou Hamer wanted freedom now, brothers and sisters. So as that great ancestor, Dr. John Henry Clark said, and can African people save themselves? He said, African people will have to take a three-way look at themselves, using the past to evaluate the present, and using the present to prophesy the future. In our long journey on this earth, we have had few friends, if any. All non-Africans who have come among us or been associated with us have clearly shown that they would betray us anytime it was to their self-interest. We have never made good alliances with other people. Properly, Africans may number 1 billion people on the face of the earth, properly counted. But what we have to know is that the most important alliance we need to make is with ourselves. So from ancient times to the modern day, brothers and sisters, ours has to be the case of brothers and sisters working together in a quest for freedom. And I'd like to say Asante Sana, thank you very much to the African Communiversity in St. Louis. Thank you. Thank you so much, brothers and sisters. We also want to thank Brother James Stewart for bringing us in, the African Paradigm Group. We're going to take a break in between. Oh, I'm sorry. Our Master of Ceremonies is going to tell us what to do next. Thank you again, brothers and sisters. Hotel. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thanks.
Azra and merira Kwesi are lecturers on African history, civilization, religion, and culture. The duo present lively and dynamic presentations and video productions based on their extensive study and travel on the African continent. These national and international lecturers also conduct the annual Kemet Nu Know Thyself educational tours to Egypt and Ethiopia. Brother and Sister Kwesi link the historical with the present by means of visual documentation to bring our story to life. For lectures, videos, audio media, or Egypt and Ethiopia tour brochures, contact Azra or merira Kwesi at Kemet Nu Productions 214-371-0206. That's 214-371-0206. Or visit www.kemetnu.com. That's KEMETNU.com.
Your purchase of this videotape, brothers and sisters, allows us to tell our story and to support and take care of our family. We do not ask for nor receive support or assistance from the white establishment. The truth can only be told when we finance our own story. In the spirit of Ma'at, truth, justice, and righteousness, please